Your life begins to fall apart. Plans collapse. Relationships change. The path that once felt certain suddenly feels meaningless. And in those moments, most people believe something has gone terribly wrong. But according to Carl Jung, this breakdown may not be a failure. It may be the beginning of discovering who you truly are. Because Jung believed something few people are prepared to hear. Before you discover your true self, your old life often has to fall apart first. The career that defined you, the identity you built, the beliefs you inherited, the relationships that shaped you, all of it begins to feel unstable. Not because life is punishing you, but because your psyche is trying to wake you up. Jung called this process individuation, and it rarely begins with clarity. It begins with crisis, the moment when the life you built no longer feels like your own, and the terrifying question appears. If this is not who I am, then who am I? That question marks the beginning of a psychological descent, a descent into the depths of your own mind. And most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid it. Because to discover your true self, you must first confront the parts of yourself you have spent years ignoring. Your shadow, your fears, your suppressed desires, your contradictions, everything the ego worked so hard to hide. And when those hidden forces begin to surface, life can feel like it's falling apart. But Jung insisted something profound. The psyche does not destroy without purpose. Sometimes it dismantles the life you built, so you can finally build the life that belongs to you. For most of your life, your identity is not truly yours. It is something slowly constructed, piece by piece, expectation by expectation. You learn who you are supposed to be: a good student, a reliable worker, a responsible adult, a person who fits into society. This identity becomes what Jung called the persona, the mask you wear to function in the world. And at first, this mask is necessary. Without it, social life would be impossible. But there is a hidden danger. Over time, you forget the mask is a mask. You begin to believe it is you. Your career becomes your identity. Your role in relationships becomes your identity. Your reputation becomes your identity. And the deeper parts of your psyche remain hidden, not destroyed, just buried. Jung believed every human being carries an enormous, unconscious life. Beneath the surface, thoughts we never fully acknowledge, emotions we never fully express, desires we were taught to suppress, fears we refused to face. This hidden realm does not disappear simply because we ignore it. It waits, patiently, and eventually, the unconscious begins to push back, sometimes subtly, through restlessness, through dissatisfaction, through the quiet feeling that something in your life is misaligned. Other times, it erupts dramatically. A career suddenly feels meaningless. A relationship collapses. A crisis shakes your sense of stability. And the ego reacts immediately. It panics. It tries to restore the old structure. Fix the job. Fix the relationship. Fix the routine. Anything to bring life back to the way it was. But what if the problem isn't the crisis? What if the crisis is the message? Jung believed many psychological breakdowns are actually attempts by the psyche to correct an imbalance. If you build your entire life around the expectations of others, eventually something inside you rebels. If you suppress too much of yourself, the unconscious begins to demand recognition. And when that happens, life begins to feel chaotic. Because the persona is cracking, the identity you carefully constructed begins to fracture. And in that fracture, something unfamiliar begins to appear. Parts of yourself you have never truly faced. This is the beginning of what Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious. And it is rarely comfortable, because the unconscious does not just contain creativity and potential. It also contains the shadow. Everything you were taught to reject about yourself: anger, jealousy, ambition, desire, aggression, qualities that were pushed into the dark corners of the psyche. And when life begins to fall apart, these hidden aspects start surfacing. Suddenly you notice emotions you cannot explain, reactions that surprise you, Impulses that challenge the identity you believed you had. The ego experiences this as a threat, but Jung saw it differently. He believed this confrontation was essential, because without facing the unconscious, you can never become whole. You can only remain the persona, a mask living a life that looks stable from the outside, but feels empty within. The collapse of that mask is painful, but it is also the doorway to something deeper. Because when the old identity cracks, the real psychological journey finally begins. The journey inward. The journey toward discovering who you truly are. And that journey always begins the same way. With uncertainty, with confusion, with the unsettling feeling that the ground beneath your life is shifting. But Jung believed something extraordinary hides within that instability. The possibility of rebirth. Not the rebirth of the persona, but the birth of the self. The deeper center of the psyche. The part of you that existed long before society told you who to be. And finding it requires courage. Because before you discover your true self, your old life may have to fall apart. This is the moment most people misunderstand. Life begins to feel unstable, confusing, unpredictable, and the immediate reaction is panic. You think something has gone wrong. But according to Carl Jung, something deeper may be happening. The unconscious is pushing upward. For years, it stayed silent, hidden behind routines, responsibilities, social expectations. But the psyche cannot stay divided forever. Eventually, the unconscious demands attention. And when it does, life begins to shake. You lose interest in things that once motivated you. Goals start feeling hollow. Conversations feel superficial. You sense something inside you is changing, but you cannot yet explain what it is. This stage is deeply uncomfortable because the old identity is weakening, but the new self has not yet appeared. You stand in a psychological in-between. Not who you were, not yet who you will become. Jung believed this stage is unavoidable. He described it as a descent into the unconscious, a journey many people resist. Because what waits in the unconscious is not only wisdom, it is also the shadow, the parts of you that were rejected, the emotions you were told were unacceptable, the impulses you buried to be liked, anger, ambition, jealousy, power, desire. These forces do not disappear. They live beneath the surface. And when the ego weakens, they begin to surface. This is why life can feel chaotic during transformation. You start noticing sides of yourself you never acknowledged, reactions you cannot fully control, thoughts that contradict your old identity. At first, the ego tries to suppress them again. It wants control, order, predictability. But the unconscious is stronger than repression. The more it is ignored, the louder it becomes. This is the inner conflict Jung spoke about, the battle between the ego and the deeper self. And this battle often coincides with external crisis. Careers collapse, relationships change, life directions shift. It feels like everything is falling apart. But Jung saw a deeper pattern. When the psyche begins transformation, the structures built around the false self begin to dissolve, not because life is cruel, but because the old structure can no longer hold the truth of who you are becoming. This is why many people experience profound life shifts. During periods of inner awakening, the unconscious reorganizes your priorities. What once mattered loses importance. What once seemed impossible begins to call you. You feel drawn towards something new, but you cannot yet see the full path. And that uncertainty can be terrifying, because the ego wants guarantees. The unconscious offers none. It only offers growth. And growth requires letting go of who you thought you were. This is why Jung warned that individuation is not a comfortable process. It is a confrontation with the deepest layers of your psyche. But within that confrontation lies extraordinary potential. Because when you face the unconscious, you begin to reclaim lost parts of yourself. Creativity, authenticity, inner authority, energy that was once trapped in repression begins to return. And slowly, very slowly, A new sense of identity begins to emerge. Not the identity society assigned you, but the identity rooted in your deeper nature. This is the beginning of discovering your true self. But the path toward it is rarely peaceful. It passes through confusion, through uncertainty, through the collapse of illusions, which is why Jung believed, something most people struggle to accept. Before psychological rebirth, there is often psychological chaos. Before clarity, there is darkness. And before you discover who you truly are, your life may first need to fall apart. This is the stage where many people turn back, because the descent feels too uncomfortable, too uncertain, too lonely. Your old identity is dissolving, but the new one has not fully formed. You feel suspended between two lives, the one you used to live, and the one trying to emerge. This psychological space is deeply unsettling, because the ego hates uncertainty. It wants structure, certainty, control. But transformation does not offer control. It demands surrender. This is the paradox Carl Jung described. The ego must weaken, so the deeper self can emerge. But the ego experiences this as a threat. It tries to rebuild the old life, return to familiar patterns, recreate the old identity, anything to avoid facing the unknown. Many people succeed in doing exactly that. They silence the call of the unconscious. They return to the safe path, the expected path, the socially approved path. And on the surface, life becomes stable again. But something inside remains restless, because the deeper self was never heard. Jung believed this is one of the great tragedies of modern life. People living entire lifetimes without ever meeting their true selves, because the journey inward felt too dangerous, too disruptive, too uncomfortable. But for those who continue the descent, something remarkable begins to happen. The chaos slowly starts revealing patterns. The emotions that once felt overwhelming begin to make sense. You start recognizing the hidden forces shaping your life, your fears, your desires, your suppressed instincts, your forgotten creativity. The unconscious begins to communicate, not through logic, but through symbols, dreams, intuition, unexpected insights. The deeper psyche begins guiding you, and slowly, you begin integrating what was once hidden. The shadow is no longer an enemy. It becomes a source of energy, a source of honesty, a source of psychological power. Qualities you once rejected become strengths. The anger you suppressed becomes courage. The ambition you denied becomes direction. The sensitivity you hid becomes empathy. You start becoming more whole. Not perfect, but integrated. This is what Jung meant by individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are. Not the person the world demanded, but the person your psyche was always trying to become. This transformation does not happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, sometimes painfully, sometimes beautifully, but gradually, something inside you stabilizes. A deeper center emerges, no longer defined by roles, no longer dependent on approval, no longer controlled by unconscious fears. You begin living from the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche. And from this place, life changes, not because external circumstances become perfect, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. You are aligned with your own nature. And this alignment brings something the ego could never provide: a quiet sense of meaning, a sense that your life belongs to you. But reaching this place requires courage, because the path toward the true self begins the same way for everyone, with confusion, with instability, with the feeling that life is falling apart. And yet, according to Jung, that collapse may be the very thing that saves you. At some point, the chaos begins to settle, not because life becomes perfect, but because you begin to change. You start seeing your struggles differently. The breakdown no longer feels meaningless. It begins to feel necessary. This is the moment transformation becomes visible. Slowly, quietly, something inside you reorganizes. Your priorities shift. Your values deepen. Your sense of self becomes less fragile. You no longer chase approval the way you once did. You no longer build your life purely around expectations. You begin listening to something deeper, an inner compass. This is what Carl Jung called the self, the deeper center of the psyche, the part of you that exists beyond the ego. When you begin living from this place, life feels different, not easier, but more authentic. You stop performing a role. You start living your own life. And that changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Relationships become more honest. Your energy returns because you are no longer fighting yourself. You are no longer divided between who you are and who you pretend to be. This is the quiet power of individuation, the process of becoming whole. But Jung warned that this journey is not meant for everyone because it demands something rare: honesty, radical honesty with yourself. You must face your fears, your shadow, your illusions, your contradictions. Most people prefer comfort over truth. They cling to the familiar, even when it slowly suffocates their potential. But some people feel a deeper call, a quiet inner pressure that refuses to be ignored. If you feel that pressure, if your life feels like it is breaking apart, if the path you once trusted suddenly feels empty, Jung would say something extraordinary. You may not be losing your way. You may finally be finding it. Because sometimes, life must dismantle the person you thought you were, so you can become the person you were meant to be. And if this message resonated with you, then take a moment. Reflect on where you are in your own journey. Are you holding on to an identity that no longer feels true? Or are you standing at the edge of transformation? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to explore more ideas from Carl Jung about the unconscious, the shadow, and the path toward individuation, subscribe to the channel, because the most important journey you will ever take is the journey into your own mind.